So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end. As per Yishmael the prophet, we find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As we read then Yishmael, firstly, when a nation or a group of nations are in trouble, most often what comes up in their minds is salvation through some sort of God of belief of their own. But let's then understand what goes on with the world as far as we understand the transition is taking place from 1,000 years of deceit, and we are back on the plans of the Creator himself of then reconstructing the holy cities laid waste from many centuries, as very plainly stated in the chapter 61st of Yishmael the prophet. Because of the interference of the establishment known as church, unfortunately lots of people, when they read the Greco-Roman translation of the word, they don't get the entire scope of the understanding of the holy instructions as they are from its original Hebrew. What most people have in their houses, in their homes, it's simply a Greco-Roman translation, and unfortunately these people, they did a very bad job while translated so many centuries ago. These modern days, we have then the privilege of having, for instance, computer and the internet, where then the information linked with the technology of times and seasons and many other factors, we can determine then very easily how frail were the translations done by the Greco and the Romans. Let's say, for instance, give an example. The great ship Titanic. As many people know, the last century there was this huge ship built in Northern Ireland, and then during its first trip, unfortunately, had a hit a berg and went down. Today, if a specialized submarine goes down there and watches this ship, they're going to find it was not the Titanic, but it was the Olympic. And then for so many years and decades, people were always speaking of Titanic sank and was a big ship and was the largest ship of its time, and not even God could sink the ship, and so on and so forth, and it became Titanic. Many years later, when the wording then became very rusty, came down, and at this very moment you find then the M and P from behind the word Titanic. So then, studying this situation, then you find that J.P. Morgan, one of the financiers of the time, he then, along with the company, because of many kinds of problems the ship was involved with, speaking of the Olympic, then they decided to ship the other, and then they did a switch. They had a swap going on, because the Olympic and Titanic were nearly identical. But because the Olympic had a problem with a wreck, then the ship was truly ready for scrap, because the cost of repair was beyond the economical sense of the deal. So they decided then to have this ship deliberately sunk. And there were many schemes involved with this, and people thought they were acting in a gentlemanlike situation, but they were not. In fact, because of the very present proof of this situation, you find it was not the Titanic, but the Olympic. So the whole understanding, and they had movies made out of it, and so on and so forth, and they ended up being deceived. As in many decades ago, the White Star Line, for instance, and the financial people that decided to come up with a scheme, and they got away with it until the rusty wordings of these ships then became evident, and you find M and P behind the Titanic. And the Titanic then continued on. It was in the service for many years under the name Olympic. So then, let's understand what goes on as far as this church. It's very similar. The first documents translated by the Greco and the Romans, they were absolutely not aware of the importance of the holy feasts as then counting of times and seasons. They had no clue because they were not part of the Hebraic culture. The Greco and the Romans, they thought they were dealing with some sort of instant answer spirit related with times and seasons for the purposes of more gain, and then they decided to translate themselves. Now later on, we find out churches, they simply do not exist. The only reason they are around is because they were after the people, so then they should pay their taxes. That's the only reason why. Let's give an example. Romans, for instance. You find from the original manuscripts of the Tzaielic lineage, the original manuscripts of the Holy Hebrews, the very original, and the writing was either in Paleo-Hebrew or then Aramaic. Either of those should be valid. Then you find in Romans, Shaliach Shaul then obviously wrote many sections, and then it explains very simply, let each person then submit to the government. And then they go on and on and on and on. Was it truly for a person to submit to a government? This was then the Greco-Roman translation. But the true translation from the original reads then, let every soul be subjected to the people of the kingdom to come government. You understand the huge distinction? The Greco-Roman translation states every person or every soul should obey the government, versus let every soul be subjected to the kingdom to come government's people, explaining of then tabernacling and the holy cities that were around. And they are returning as per the prophecies of Yishmael the prophet, chapter 61 and chapter 1:8. So then, since we understand at least the very basic of this let's then understand another topic, the wife of Lot. We read there was then some sort of angelic situation going on, that they were walking into the city. Firstly, Lot had a dream. Angels, they don't walk in the earth in a physical form. they must be directed, linked with the temple. People never have visions of angels. And if they do, it is a deceiving spirit, not the true angel of God. But then the wife of Lot, she was obviously a pagan from the city. Lot obviously went there, and he stayed there for a while. And the evils of this place was extreme. As it is, for instance, United States and many of the first world countries. They are promiscuous. They do whatsoever they can for a quick pleasure. And then Lot had a dream. And in his dream, he saw these angels coming towards the city, and then developed what we read then on the Holy Instructions. And then he was warned by the angel in his dream to leave the city. And he had this dream quite several times. So then, when came the time, then he went out, and he spoke with his wife, but she didn't believe him, because she did not had the dream he had. So Lot went out, and she stayed behind. Then as Lot went out of the city, then fire and brimstone came from heaven and destroyed the cities of the plain. Do we understand why the Dead Sea has its name and there is so much salt there? Do the people understand what takes place with the body of a person when it is absolutely completely burned? Only the mineral salts remain. Then you understand why then the gathering of the salt in the Dead Sea then was taking place. But then, did she become a statue of salt? The Holy Instructions from the Israelic lineage gives us, and she became then a memorial of salt. So we would remind ourselves during this present age what was taking place back then because of what's coming in the future while during the autumn feast. It's a memorial for us to remind ourselves what's going to take place when vengeance comes. Did she then observe the back and became a column of salt? That's mysticism. And there are other examples. The holy people, the Hebrews, when they were in the desert, did they walk 40 years in the desert and then their sandals never wore away? Let's evaluate this. There was some sort of a mysticism in the kind of leather they were using it. No. While they were in the desert during training time, then the Creator gave, obviously, Moses. He said, from this place, from the Euphrates to the Nile, where your sandal then touches the ground is yours. What did they do? They carved on stones the symbols of sandals. Obviously, throughout the ages, it would never wear away, would it? So then, when people they begin understanding, they are absolutely covered with mysticism when they read the Holy Instructions. Then we realize there is a whole lot more we should learn. And then understanding the Holy Instructions from its original basis. So then we can understand what's coming in the near future. These are a few examples then we should absolutely point out. Besides Cornelius, that saw an angel and so on and so forth, he was crazy. It's because of the influence of the Roman government at the time when they were translating then the holy instructions, then they thought would become important on their behalf for the purposes of charging taxes, that Cornelius had a vision of an angel. And he was a centurion, a leader of 100 men from the army. Yet he claims he saw an angel. And you can read in your own Bible. It's absolutely a pure fake. But when people, they observe the Bible, they think, oh, this is a holy material and writings. No, the Greco-Roman translation is a piece of junk. It's not even worth using in a lavatory. And that's okay to say, you know, this material is not worthy. It was translated centuries back, and with people that had no clue what they were doing. But one thing they knew, they had to start gathering taxes, because people, when they got involved with the holy cities, though the Messiah said the people should pay their taxes first and then give focus to God. But people were neglecting. Then they tried with a desperation find some sort of a God link and economical link. That's why you find in Romans, let every soul be subjected to the government, rather than the kingdom to come governments people via the holy cities. So then, what's going on in the world? We find that then, for instance, the German economy is not doing very nicely. It's down 5.7%, and today, this very day, then, the Chinese premier is speaking with the German government to come up with some sort of a deal, because the Eurozone is down. Daniel the prophet said at some point they would try to adhere to each other, but they would not, speaking of the nations. And as we understand, the European Union, their symbol is a half-built Tower of Babel. And that's what Daniel was prophesying against. They are going to try to adhere to each other, but they would not. So the Eurozone has failed. Not only this, but then China is making a huge push for then substituting the USD as fast as they can. So as the Soviets, they are trying to do this in the next 24 to 36 months. They should get rid of the USD. We are waiting then for the Dragon Mart store to open up in Cancun, Mexico, so then products from Asia can come to the Americans and then sold for much cheaper prices, so people, they can have more to eat and materials to build. What else is going on? There is a situation with the freighters. Very important. With a kind of a very detailed understanding of the freighters. For instance, the largest of the world, Maersk, and MSC wins U.S. regulatory okay to launch then shipment pact. They can save up to 350 million a year in costs. Very wisely, because these companies are very trustworthy and very serious. It's showing then the linking up of the freighters. Gradual and gradual and gradual. You find then more freighters becoming then linked up with a system. So that's very great news from yesterday. Very important. And then nations are trying to do more trade, but unfortunately they are stuck with the system of the 1,000 years of deceit, and they are finding themselves in the position from the hard place in the rock. What would be important, for instance, for those main nations such as China, the Soviet Union, and then Africa. China then yet lacks a very important point. It must come up with the virtual yen, virtual Chinese yen, or the virtual Chinese money. As we understand, for instance, Bitcoin and the other virtual monetary systems, China has a huge advantage because they can put out the Chinese yen in a virtual form. So in any place where China has a trade and availability of their money, people can start then store up resources in the computer. Very importantly also, the department store of Gap is also giving lots of focus on internet purchases. So the world is becoming an internet-linked place. As China then comes up with the Chinese virtual yen, then people can purchase a whole lot more, and in many countries they can hide their money from inflation. Brazil, for instance, is bankrupt. There is no doubt about it. It is absolutely bankrupt. The yearly growth came out, it was at 1%, then half, then 0.48, and we are at 0.3. So the nation is then bankrupt. And unfortunately, the existing government then, rather than developing the northeast side of this country, they decided not to do it, and they are given then handouts every month. So the outcome became a place where people are absolutely lazy. They are making children like rats, and they refuse to work. It is simply a place in this country where politicians, they get votes from via handouts, and then the south side and central Brazil will have then the most industrialized place. For instance, Paraná, one of the states, for every 47 reals, from 42 to 47 reals, only returns a single real from the government. And the rest of it they squandered, and they give checks to people so they do not work. Wouldn't that be nice, receiving a check every month and do nothing for a living, and then going around making kids so then they can receive more help? This is what then the new president, if elected, he has to deal with it. He has to come up with some sort of equilibrium and make the Northeast to work. Most of those people are vagabonds. They are lazy people, and they do not like work. Or separate Brazil from the rest of it. Make then the central Brazil and the south a country, and hack with the north. There are a few options. But then the most important at this time is truly understanding the position of China and the Chinese virtual monetary system, or the virtual Chinese yen, or virtual yen. So then people can purchase and store on their computers and start buying with Chinese money. However, you must have a direct link with the Bank of China. No other bank, only Bank of China. As Brazil then last year, in November, the vice president went over there, China, and he brought 30 billion USDs worth of Chinese money, because Brazil can do direct trade with China without using the USD. This should give us a whole lot more, because then Brazil is not tied up to this miserable USD monetary system where there is absolutely nearly nothing to invest in the United States other than destruction and war. Let me ask you this: what can a person invest on US other than a war? There is not much to invest there. They don't have nearly no technology. They already sold what they have to somebody else. The USD truly became a plague in this world rather than a solution. And more wars are being opened up in every front. That's the only thing that makes this country going is war. But the problem is we are during the time of restoration, not war. Cancun is going to get much of it because the Central and South Americans are also awaiting very expectantly for Dragon Mart. Because via Dragon Mart they can get the products from Asia much cheaper, and these will force then the countries of Central America and South America to lower their prices. And these should make the government more reliable. Or they have to place their produce on the shelf to rot. Some countries, they have some sort of a respect for politicians. Some countries, they do not deserve any of it. Some countries, they act as licensed pirates, yet they hide behind a position, yet they don't lift a finger to get the economy going forward. If this country, Brazil, wants to have some sort of a position in the future, the new president, if elect, must make the North people work. So then, as far as we can understand of the Kingdom of the South, is another important situation related with this. After very careful evaluation of the holy instructions related with the Kingdom of the South, the translator of the holy instructions on the Gentile side, one was then extracting the information from the Holy Hebrew, wasn't truly a mistake, but there are some words of Hebrew speaking of the Gentile layer of the situation and not tabernacling. So the Gentile layer, sometimes they have similar words, but truly in the wrong position. There are a few of these on the 11th chapter of Daniel. However, they do not change the events and the movements of events from the layer and topic. There is a section in the 11th chapter that explains of the northern kingdom. Explains in the 8th verse of the 11th chapter, then Egypt. In Egypt receiving arms from the kingdom of the north, explaining then the Soviet Union. Helping Egypt with as much as they can, giving arms then to Egypt. Egypt then receives these arms and then stabilizes the region and the countries around then Egypt. And Egypt then obviously is in a position where then they rescue their beliefs from where they were at in the past. So then Egypt is re-established as a nation and its glory then is given back. That's the first point. The second is, in order for them to receive these, they have to fight with existing militias of our time, ISIL. These are the sons of Yishmael. Let's not forget, we are dealing with people who are very severe in their ways of living, yet they are the sons of Yishmael. directly linked with Ibrahim or Abraham. As then Egypt fights against them, Egypt wins. And then there is a change of these ISIL people, and they become as they were in the past. In a gradual understanding, they are becoming then once again what Yishmael was, a trader, the sons of trade. But then the prophecy goes on. Then they gather themselves once again and continue on the topic, but then the word changes from south to 84, 86, or southern of. And then there are a few skirmishes that goes on even southern than related with the Congo, because there is a word over there establishing the vision. Every time in the opening of this program, it wasn't explained many times. Tabernacling, the second tabernacle services, because the first was performed by the Holy Hebrews for more than 1,000 years. Then the Messiah came, he completed the spring feast as per Leviticus. Then he spent a year with his people, they learned how to do tabernacling. Then roughly 100 years later, the first tabernacling was on the land of Cush. And from there, that's where the starting point is at. So as Egypt then controls the area around it and establishes itself as the starting point of the sons of Yishmael, reminding ourselves, Hagar, the first wife of Ibrahim, was an Egyptian. Thus then they have Egyptian lineage. Though Ibrahim or Abraham, he had a covenant with the Holy Creator himself, yet half of the anointing went towards the sons of the Egyptians. That's why Egypt is the very center. When we read then actions taking place amongst the nation, Egypt is the very center of it. Then the sons of Yishmael, they understand where they come from. That's why Egypt must receive its former glory. Then later on, ISIL then changes its name, and they begin to do what Yishmael was doing at first. Being trustworthy, doing trade, being prominent on the land. And they're going to be very prominent. But then a group of them is going to try to do what ISIL is doing at the moment. And then it's going to invoke the great powers of the Soviet Union. And because of these skirmishes going back and forth then in Congo, in the area of Congo, then they're going to join up with an army, a force, moving towards the north, because of what those sons of Yishmael, those that wanted the ISIL form of it, they're going to get in a fight. And the objective is the establishment of the vision, explained in the 11th chapter of Daniel. Thus then these relations and these skirmishes going back and forth many times. But at least we understand what goes on, at least at this point. Later on, I'm going to evaluate piece by piece of these war fronts, because related with the Middle East, the focus point, the starting point of having harmony comes with Egypt. And Egypt must receive lots of arms from the Soviet Union, because Egypt stands from the Kingdom of the North and then establishing itself on the land. So these are very important, exciting times, because we understand the movements of these people and these armies as we then go forward for the establishment of the vision. Very importantly, there are a few more details we can gather from, and these should be done later. But then let's try to find the vision, establishing the vision, found in verse 15. And then to establish the vision, but they wilt stumble. Then you can understand the previous verse explains of the violent ones. The violent ones are located beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. However, the holy word for then south is then used as Negev, or then parched land. Since we are dealing with a Gentile layer, sometimes the words in Hebrew, they must be properly placed. So for instance, the kingdom of the south related with the violent ones uses 5045. But 5045 explains the land of Negev as then desert. However, the land of the violent ones does not have 5045 because it's very lushy. Lots of forest and water. So the word is then 8486, the south from Egypt. So it's very interesting learning this, because then we can establish what then armies are going to be moving, who against who. We understand then some of these movements, we understand then the covenant and the establishment of the vision. And then we understand then later on forces from the Congo area going north to fight against then the sons of Yishmael, those who wanted the ISIL side of it rather than Yishmael side of it, then imposing the establishment of the vision on the land of Cush on Sudan. So these are very intricate, and we're going to study these more later. But at the moment, nations are awaiting for the Chinese virtual yen, so people can start doing purchases in the computer using the Chinese money. So please stay tuned. Much more coming up.